Hey, this is Dan with the Video Game Collecting Podcast. Hey, this is Dan with the Video Game Collecting Podcast. We're here with John, SnesFinder on Instagram, and he's going to help us navigate through the great system of Super Nintendo. So, John, you ready to rock and roll on your favorite system?
Yeah, let's focus on the Super Nintendo.
Nice. So, let's get started by going over kind of setting the scene. NES, heck of a system. It had its heyday. They're looking to get into the 16-bit era. What's kind of some of the launch titles that started the system?
Well, I think there was only a few. You had, Sin City was one of them, Pilot Wing, Gradius 3, and there was a couple more. I don't know off the top of my head the other two, but that was your starting. There was, I think, 3 that started, and then they put out 2 more, or maybe they did 5. I don't know what the actual truth is about it.
What was the first game that you think was a hit on the system? Was like the big first game was it Super Mario World? Was it another title?
I would assume, I would assume that it was Super Mario World. I don't know. I'm kind of I had the Super Nintendo when I was a kid in 94, but that was late at the time. The next system came out, a couple of years later. So I was kind of late to the party on that. But I'm assuming, your Mario titles are going to be the most in-demand titles for the Super Nintendo. Mario World, Mario Kart, probably Mario RPG might be in a lot of people's list. I don't know if it was a bestseller at the time, but certainly nowadays, it's definitely up there with some of the most sought-after games. And Super Nintendo is known for being an RPG system. They had some of the best, like you think of Chrono Trigger, think of Final Fantasy 3, and some of these other series that started on Super Nintendo, like the Breath of Fire, that went on into PlayStation. Exactly, yeah. So, there's a few more in there. It's just, and that's what I really think people, when they think Super Nintendo, those are going to be the titles you think of, and there's obviously a couple of really awesome Konami multiplayer games on there, like Sunset Riders and Turtles in Time. So those are definitely some of my, favorite games.
Well, I think the software part of Super Nintendo is what really was amazing, is when you think of those titles you just mentioned. We also got Link to the Past, which is, to me, I think my favorite game of all time. That and Ocarina, but it really is up there. You have the Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. You had some really great sports games. I loved NHL. I think it was 94, 95. Just some amazing games. We're not talking about the huge IPs of Super Mario World 1 to whatever. You just had so many great RPGs and just games in total. And with that said, is there any games that you felt didn't get the appreciation that you think they deserved, like for the system? Kind of how...
Yeah, I think... I wasn't always the biggest gamer, but one game I think is Wild Guns that doesn't... as soon as I played that game, I had so much fun. That's one game I would definitely suggest playing, is Wild Guns. I think that game should have got a lot more attention, but with so many games, and at a time when video games, you had Nintendo still releasing games, you had the Super Nintendo with 700-something games on it. It's like, how do you choose? How do you know?
So much. And, as a kid, you only could buy 1 or 2 games, so you don't even know of every game sometimes. And me and my brother, we had our handful of games, and I remember it was the 94 earthquake in Northridge, because I'm out here in SoCal, and we played, it had to be NHL. It was not NHL 94, 95. I'm going to have to figure that out. And we just played that over and over. I'm not a huge sports guy, but we played it over and over. And it's funny because the games I remember the most are from the Super Nintendo, being that me and my brother, I'm not a Final Fantasy person, but we love Mystic Quest. There's just something, it had that Link to the Past vibe a little bit, and it was just a great game.
Yeah, everybody loves their first memory of an RPG they love. It's probably on the Super Nintendo, or the PlayStation if you're a little older. I can't think of any great RPGs on the N64. They're not going to be like the Super Nintendo,
Yeah, it was definitely a system where, we didn't even mention like Star Fox, which people nowadays would have no clue, but that was freaking amazing. That was an amazing game for its time. And Donkey Kong Country, that's 1, 2, and 3. I mean, those. I'm actually playing Donkey Kong Country last few days, so it's fresh in the mind.
Yeah, it's like that's kind of what I'm getting at. Like when I say Breath of Fire, it's like Donkey Kong is another great example of a franchise that started on Super Nintendo. And because it was so well done and everyone had such a fond memory, it just lived on. You know?
Well, the crazy thing about those games is they're still fun today. Like, it was only recently I really dived back into some of these libraries. And I mean, I'm playing Donkey Kong Country literally today, and I'm enjoying it. And I'm not someone that plays every game or but I could go into a game like that and get into it and really enjoy it casually. 25 years later, 30 years, whatever it is. And that's kind of why these systems are still popular today, is because you can share them with your kids and you can play them again and they're fun. And I don't know why it's different nowadays with games that maybe I just don't play the new games as much and whatever reason, but there's a simplicity to something like the Super Nintendo and those games.
Yeah, I mean, the replay value is definitely there. There's some junk on the system, just like anything else. But there's so much replay value on a lot of the games. And you can pick up any game, and it's probably not going to be half bad. There's some that are really bad. Like some of the racing games that didn't come with the FX chip are horrible. So I would stay away from those. But, for the majority, like I actually played some of the really weird ones. Like there's a couple games that are based on like diabetes health and and cigarette smoking health. Bronchi the Bronchosaurus is one, and Captain Navalin. And the one that I've actually played is Rex Ronan, the experimental surgeon. So you have to go into a cigarette smoker's mouth and clear the plaque from his teeth, clear the black tar from his lungs, and then you have to go and get clean off his heart and all that build up and all the plaque that built up there. It's such a weird game, but it's fun. I don't know. I enjoyed it, but it's weird as heck. So
what's that game again? What's the name of it?
It's Rex Ronan, the experimental surgeon.
Well, I think I'm gonna have to. I'm gonna have to pick that up. That's a done deal. So we'll wait to publish it. Put this out so I can buy it before people. It's funny because there's just so many games that some games you just don't hear about. So that's awesome.
Yeah. So I mean, and having gone through so many. See, this is where it benefits being. A reseller is I've had so many games that I've had to test. So sometimes I'll see a game and I say, I'm going to test this just because I want to try it. It ends up being pretty fun. And then there's games like that where you're like, wow, this is crazy. What did I get myself into? But if you don't have time to play it, you can almost get just as much from it if you watch like a playthrough on YouTube or something. If you just kind of want to see what I'm talking about. And
no. Don't cheapen it. Everyone pick up a copy. Pick up a copy, play this damn... No, I'm just joking. But, no, I mean, I do think the experience... That's the great thing about video games is, like, you can play it and enjoy it and collect mint copies. You can do both. And it's funny because that's not a cheap cart. That's a $50, $60 game loose. So, yeah, I'm going to have to pick up a copy. But no, what I was going to say is, something we haven't even mentioned was we'd even mentioned the Mega Man X series, which is a fave of mine. That was remarkable. I mean, you have Mega Man Soccer. I'm trying to go through some of the titles in my head. And I know you mentioned Mario Kart and what that started. There's so many great games that literally started on the system or just kept it going. And Mega Man X 1, 2, and 3, I mean, some of the best video game play, in my opinion, ever.
Yeah, the Mega Mans. You got Earthworm Jim on there.
I was going to say Earthworm Jim 2. That was definitely a classic. Though I like the Genesis version better, but that's just because I own the cover. And it has, I think, that extra level. But, it's honestly, like, them having Earthworm Jim on the platform is amazing. And it was it still is. I mean, I'm playing Earthworm Jim 1. I'm stuck on a level. And that's why I started Donkey Kong. But with that being said, there's so many. I mean, Pilot Wings, actually, I really enjoyed at the time. It's really hard to play now, but it was really fun at the time.
Yeah, that's the thing, is like when you're used to playing some of the modern games, trying to go back, like, yeah, it's nostalgic, but it gets like, oh man, this game is really bad.
Well, that's where you stick with games like Donkey Kong Country, Super Mario World, Mega Man X. is that you can still, you know, play where it doesn't get too, like Pilot Wings is something else. But no, so, you know, that the controller was definitely an upgrade from the NES. We'll go into a little bit the hardware side. I mean, one thing that I always think kept the value of some of these systems is that they were really well made. I mean, a Super Nintendo cartridge is not easy to break. It's made so well, unless it's the Majesco, and we'll go into Majesco in a little bit, that, you know, is there any hardware stuff you'd like to add about, I mean, if it's the 16-bit, if it's the controllers?
I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of hardware on the Super. I mean, but the controllers are resilient, and the system is too. Compared to Nintendo's, how often they break is, you know, few and far between. I mean, there definitely, I get a few here and there that stop working for whatever reason. Usually you can clean them out and they're good. But the controllers, those are just as easy. If they stop working, you can open them up, clean off the pads, and they'll start working like new again to this day, which is crazy. But yeah, having broken controllers that doesn't fear me, because you can easily open these things up and clean them and restore them, and they'll play just like new most of the time. As long as there's nothing tragically wrong with them, they'll be good.
With the games in the boxes, you know, they switch from, you know, vertical to horizontal. And I guess that was because of the cartridge, the different size. Yeah. We could go over the seams a little bit. About a lot of them are H seams. Is there some overlap? I gotta look. I have it written down. But what's the different seams on a Super Nintendo sealed game?
Yeah, so 95% of them have the H seam, which goes, you know, two seams across the top and the bottom, and then one down the center of the back, forming, you know, what would look like an H. There's a few exceptions. Obviously, like you mentioned briefly, the Majesco games. So basically, all those Majesco games, and I think there's like 50 of them. There's more than you think. If you look at a list, there's like 45 or 50 of them. That's going to be a different seal if it's a Majesco re-release. It's going to have a seam down the opposite tabs, so the open tab and then the other side instead of the top and bottom. And there won't be a seam down the center, but there'll be kind of a seamless overlap on the back, so you won't really notice it. But the easiest way to tell if you're looking at a Majesco game or an original print is to just look where it was made. Was it made in Japan? Was it made in Mexico? Or was it assembled in Mexico? That's your big difference. Made in Japan or made in Mexico is usually first print. There's some exceptions, but if it was assembled in Mexico, that's the Majesco. So those are going to have your black and white manuals and your just low quality labels. Stay away from that stuff.
Yeah,
go with the original prints. There's a couple other differences. There's a couple other seals. Some of the late sports games, I'm trying to think. Madden 98 is one of them. NBA Live 98, NHL 98, and possibly some of the 97s of those will have a different kind of seam. It's just like a real crappy seam. It's probably legit if you see it. Nobody's resealing these things. It looks like crap for those really late release games. This is like after Majesco they're talking though. Any game that had a hollow foil. There's the Claymates game. There's one of the Star Trek games, I think Starfleet Bridge Simulator. And then there's the small Super Bomberman box. Not the party pack, but the original release. Those had a different kind of seam. The boxes are white inside, and the seam is slightly different. It's like, it kind of reminds me of a Majesco seam, to be honest. It's a little different, but the only difference is there's a seam along the bottom, so it's three sides of the seam, I think. I have to double check that. It's been so long, but I'm pretty sure that's... Well, I don't want to misinform anybody.
Well, I'll explain a little bit about Majesco while you look that up, and then we'll come back to that. Is while you're looking at it is Majesco. We did do an episode previously about Majesco, and Majesco was a company that made their stuff and did re-releases for the most part, and made their games in Mexico very cheaply. They would lease these titles from Nintendo and other things, and they would release them for way cheaper and capitalize on that. So you had black and white manuals, you had cheaper boxes, and there was only one original game released. I believe it was Frogger that was released. The rest were re-releases, and usually you could tell, like say Mega Man, it's a darker color. Like there's usually like the coloring's off. It looks almost fake, but it's like a darker color. On the Mega Man X, there's not a Capcom logo on it for some reason. But a lot of them do say made in Majesco on the back and assembled like John said here, assembled in Mexico. And it's, if you're investing in a game, I would suggest stick with Japan if possible. That's usually closer to the first print, if not the first print. And Majesco, it just was late releases made way cheaper. So were you able to find that the game?
Yeah, I did find at least the Super Bomberman, and it's an overlapping theme, just like a Majesco game. So, if you do see that, there's a couple games, Bomberman, the Star Trek with the hollow box, and the Claymates. Those don't have the original themes. Those have kind of weird looking themes. So don't be, if you do come across them, they're 3 oddball games that no one probably cares about except me. There's certain things I've noticed along the way.
What's the rarest games for the Super Nintendo?
Sealed or open or what?
Let's do 3 sealed, 3 open, if there's different.
Oh boy.
Not most valuable, but just if you're trying to collect the set, what's going to be that thorn in the ass?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if I'm even necessarily trying to go for a sealed set. I don't want to say that I am, because if I say that I am, then in the back of my mind I planted some sort of seed. That means I have to, I have to figure this out one way or another. I'm going to have to make this goal work. But I have over 600 sealed Super Nintendo games. They only made 720 something. I have to look at the number. I just crossed over 600 sealed games the other day. It's been 10 years. What will the next 10 years say? I don't know. What will they bring? Who knows? But as far as the rarest, I don't know. As far, for sealed, I'm still looking for some. I would like to buy sealed.
What's the rarest CIBs?
The rarest CIB you're going to be looking for is probably some of the soccer games. Super Copa comes to mind. International Superstar Soccer, the first one comes to mind, not the second one. It's really, there's so many games that are uncommon that would be tied for kind of, some of that top spot.
Well, my question for you is, I was a huge International Superstar Soccer 2000 fan for the N64. I mean, huge. Me and my buddies played that literally for a decade. I know the first one's worth the money, but I don't know why. Why is, I mean, obviously it's probably super rare, but why is it super rare? Is there a reason of why International Superstar Soccer is rare?
Well, so you got those 2 international soccer games and Super Copa that were, I think they were really regional as to where they sold them. It says on the back of the box that they were for sale in Canada also, but I highly doubt it. I feel like Mexico and some areas of South America and maybe Arizona and California.
Are you just guessing because that's where people like soccer? I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
Well, that's just, I think that was the regions that saw the release of these games. There's 700 something games on the system. When you walk into KB Toys back in the 90s, you only saw 50 of them. The shelf only could fit 50 behind the display cabinet. So you're not seeing, most of the library. So I think they were just really selective onto where this was released. But the majority of International Superstar Soccers that I have seen have come from South America or Mexico. So that's what led me to believe that they saw the heaviest release of these games, which makes sense because down there, soccer is really popular compared to us here. We like our baseball and football,
Oh yeah, no, I was making a joke, but no, it makes sense. I mean, that's where soccer games are going to sell the best, and they look at the demographics, and there's just a reality that, yeah, that's, they test market this stuff, and if they didn't think it's going to sell on the East Coast, they're not going to release it. They're not going to have it take up shelf space. So, it makes a lot more sense. Is there a game that you pick up every time you see, regardless, is like where you have like 10 copies of a certain game?
Not really. I'm not much of like a hoarder, if you would. The thing about Super Nintendo is, I don't know what it is. Everyone says that it's their favorite console. Oh, that was my favorite console. I love Super Nintendo. It has my favorite games. But when it comes to collecting, I don't know why, but Super Nintendo is not everyone's top choice to collect. They'll go towards Nintendo, they'll go towards 64, they'll go towards Game Boy. So for me to start hoarding copies of Super Nintendo games that are rare or uncommon isn't necessarily a good idea because I could probably acquire them quicker than I could sell them. That is changing, but for the longest time, selling the games used to be the hardest part. Finding them wasn't always the hardest thing. It was when you start getting extras, is selling them. So no, I wouldn't pick up too many extras of a certain game unless, of course, the price was right, but I wouldn't buy it just to try to corner the market on a certain game. That hasn't boded well in the past.
Well, I know sometimes, like myself, there are certain titles that, I just enjoy. I'm trying to think of which titles, but, where, hey, it's cheap and I like it, so I'll pick up a copy. Not that I have more than 5 or 7 or something of it, and they're cheap, like $30. But with that said, is there anything you would really like to say about the system, about looking back on the 700 game library, the hardware? Is there what stands out to you as something that you had to live through it, you had to experience it, and it's hard to explain, to kids these days that didn't grow up with the Super Nintendo?
I mean that's a tough question. I've tried to play the Super Nintendo with like my younger brother and stuff, and he's more into Minecraft and things. So it's, I guess it depends on who your audience is, but if you have an appreciation for the history of video games, that's going to lead you back to, the Nintendo and the Super Nintendo, basically. Those two systems are your core system. Everything kind of stems from them. Yeah, N64 had, Mario parties and stuff. But if you have an appreciation for video games and video game collecting, I think you're going to end up at, Nintendo or Super Nintendo to get, that original release of Zelda, the first Zelda that came out, the first few Final Fantasies that came out.
The Super Nintendo was definitely the first system I ever really remember, and have such fond memories that I do go back to Link to the Past all the time, and I do have to play Mystic Quest again soon because it's been a few years now. But there's something about the smoothness of the 16-bit play that you don't need it to be like today's graphics. It's just the gameplay is just so simple that it makes, not that it's easy, simple doesn't mean easy, but yeah, no, it's amazing.
Completely timeless. You're absolutely right. It's timeless.
Yeah, timeless is probably the best way to put it. And something about the Super Nintendo makes it, maybe it's because that's the first system I really remember buying new games for, stuff like that. But that time period of 16-bit play, and I kind of felt like nowadays the only games I play, I played Call of Duty for a long time, don't get me wrong, but I go back to the retro games, and I played the new Bowser's Fury and stuff like that, and that's cool and stuff, but there's very few new franchises that I really enjoy. I don't know why that is, where Super Nintendo, they were busting them out like crazy. You look at, the titles that we mentioned before, there's a lot of stuff that started in that era, and I don't know of the last series that was created in the recent era. We look at Minecraft, or trying to think of other stuff. Call of Duty and stuff like that, I guess, but like actually something simplistic as of Mario Kart or Smash Brothers. But
I think they realized that too. It's like, that's why all these Switch games that are coming out are just remakes.
They're going back in the library. I don't know what it is. It's not that they don't have the talent to create new games. I can't put my finger on why they can't make the simplistic games now. You think it would be easier than ever. I know there is great indie games created, though that's not my thing, so I don't know them. But yeah, no, it's an interesting concept of why that system's timeless.
Honestly, I just don't know if those same games that we grew up with and loved would, ring the same with today's generation. It's like, they like what they like. They prefer these crazy multiplayer games so that they're online with each other, and that's not how we grew up. So that's not how we remember it. So trying to sit them down and play a multiplayer game without a headset and a group of people, it's a different experience to them. So what they know as video gaming is different than to what we know, kind of as our history.
Not to go too deep into it, I wonder how much having cell phones, iPads, the stimulation of it has to be over. You have to do so much to get people's attentions these days. And that kids, that they have to there has to be a lot going on in the game for them to not be bored. But anyways, we'll go back to Super Nintendo, No, say your thought.
I don't think it will ever go back, and that's kind of like, I think that, the games now are so crazy. You look at some of these titles and some of the gameplay, like Super Meat Boy, it's like, what is this, Like so much shovelware. I don't think they're going to go back to the style of games and the way they used to do them,
Oh, yeah. No, I don't really think they'll go back. It's just something that I know we're going to become that old generation that is like, oh, gaming in our day, which has already started right now. But gaming in our day, you just needed two buttons and.
Yeah, I mean, you go back even further to Atari players, and they'll tell you a different story too. They had one button and a joystick and a couple dots on a screen. So even the Super Nintendo games look complicated to them.
Yeah, go back to the arcades and. Yeah, no, I hear you.
And that's just how things change, through time.
No, definitely, and it's going to keep on changing, and we'll see. It's going to be interesting what gaming is in 10 years from now. And luckily, I'll be on Donkey Kong 2, Country 2, still not beat it. But no, it's fun to go down these rabbit holes, and something like Super Nintendo. Something about those black boxes, man. Those black boxes are so iconic.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, when you look at them, a wall of black boxes with just logos, it's like, meh, but, they're great, who cares? They weren't meant to look pretty all together on a wall like they do now. It's like, that's something we created, we manifested that 20 years later, when these things weren't supposed to be collectible at all. Here we are trying to hunt down, all these boxes that got thrown away, or even what's more, still sealed, so it's like, that's one thing that's definitely going to be different now is I think people are buying video games and Switch games and these generation games and grading them with the hope that they're going to be worth a lot and they're going to be collectible someday. And maybe, I don't know. I can't speak for the future, but when you buy something as a collectible, when it first comes out and it's sold as a collectible, it never ends up being collectible, because, I mean, you look at Beanie Babies, what happened there? Everyone bought them as a collectible. They kept coming out with more, and people thought they were going to be popular forever, but that came crashing down. And I think trying to buy these new generation games like on the Switch and getting them graded immediately, I just don't see that being something. The reason that we love these Nintendo games and boxes is because nobody ever thought that they would be collectible, 20 years later, which was what makes them collectible,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be little niches or whatever. I agree that not every game's going to be collectible, and it might be a waste of money to try to go down that road. There's going to be people that profit, but then also people that lose money. I personally enjoy the older stuff, and I agree, like, hey, I'm not going to go spend $50 a game and go get them graded for another $70 and hope that they appreciate when everyone else is doing it, kind of like Star Wars toys in 97 or whenever they did the new generation stuff, and all that stuff is not worth a whole lot now because everyone bought them thinking they're going to be collectible, and kind of like the Beanie Babies and many other things. But again, if people love it, good for them.
When I started, it was never an investment. We were never buying these things. The small crowd of people that were on Nintendo Age or whatever, nobody ever talks about buying things as an investment, and we kind of shunned others who did. We'd say video games aren't an investment, blah, blah, blah. So we were just buying them, because we loved them. Like, once you buy the first couple because you wanted to play it, something happens. And, you're like, oh, let me get this one, let me get that one. I want to try this one. And then you buy a few and a lot. So now you have extras. And before you know it, you're counting down to how many games you need left on this system before you move on to the next. So I think that's one thing that's different now about video games as opposed to even 2011, which doesn't seem that long ago, but we weren't buying the games thinking they would be worth a lot more someday. In fact, anytime someone overspent or spent a lot on a video game, we would kind of be like, what are you doing? It was a small community, so everyone kind of knew each other, who was buying what. And if someone spent a lot, you could expect someone else to go into them and send them a direct message and say, what the hell are you doing, man? Why'd you spend that much on this game? You're crazy. And, it was fractions compared to what they're going for now. And I was guilty of that a lot. I've had threads started about me on Nintendo Age for spending too much money on a game, but looking back now, I don't regret that at all. So.
Well, I think it's funny because I can't remember the exact year, but it was something like 7, 8, 9 years ago. I can't remember when I bought my first graded game. It was the only game I bought graded for many years. Well, actually two. One was, but SMB3 I bought because I really wanted it. And I was like, it was graded by VGM. Like, I hope they know what they're doing, but I just bought it because I really wanted it. I actually bought it qualified first and didn't realize what the heck qualified meant. So once I figured out it wasn't sealed, I was like, I got to buy a sealed one. So I think I spent $250 on the first one. Then I spent $300 to get the sealed copy. And then I sold the qualified one. And I was figuring when I sold it, I'm like, they probably don't know it's open, but now they're doing really well with that if they kept it. But no, and that was the thing was I was like, I really just want this. I really just want this one sealed game. Don't know why. I wanted it, and I collected through those years, and I kind of wish I found that Yellow Brick Road of Nintendo Age, but life happens, and unfortunately, I did not find Nintendo Age, and I was kind of collecting on my own little quest, but never got really serious about it because it's hard to, without that knowledge, to be confident in seals and everything else. So I was going to swap meets, buying stuff. I remember I found a Super Nintendo. My first really nice box I found was a Street Fighter Championship Edition, and it was box only. But I was like, oh my God, this thing is perfect. I'm like, how is this possible? And I still have that box, actually. And it still doesn't have the game inside. Actually, I might have the game somewhere, but it doesn't matter. But it was just like, hey, how did this survive? And that was, I mean, now we all have sealed games galore, but I mean, this is me at a swap meet for 10, 15 bucks. And I was probably the happiest person in the world just because I'm like, this is so cool. It's so shiny black. That's what I remember thinking.
Yeah, and that's the thing about Super Nintendo is the condition is tough. I mean, think of black box Nintendo games and how easily a little speck, a little nick or a scratch on the box is going to show. And then it's every single game in the library is like that. So, finding really good condition Super Nintendo boxes is tough, to say the least. But they do show up. It's not impossible.
I really appreciate you talking to us through the Super Nintendo. Is there any last thoughts on the system, on that era of 16-bit gaming in the Nintendo generation there? Yeah, is there any last thoughts on that?
I mean, I've always wondered why, and maybe you can answer, is a lot of people say Super Nintendo is their favorite or was their favorite system, but why not collect for it more? Why are more people seem to gravitate towards Nintendo and then Game Boy and then 64 and kind of either always have less Super Nintendo or they kind of half-ass the condition of their boxes or maybe they just went card only? What is it about Super Nintendo that kind of makes it the black sheep? And I know, I've heard a few of your episodes and you've talked to some people that have said, yeah, Super Nintendo is undervalued. I think Super Nintendo is undervalued, but I can tell you that's been the case for, several years. Super Nintendo has seemed to be undervalued. So what is it about Super Nintendo? Is it just so daunting or is it just too expensive?
First off, I think of the NES. That's been the most collected system of everything. So it's the first Nintendo system. It's something that people, I don't know why, but it is easier to collect. I think like any PC owned from that is kind of, oh, that's from the NES. So that has that going for it. The people that usually collect N64, that was their favorite system. Super Nintendo just kind of falls between the cracks. I kind of feel like that the games that, like me personally, I feel like, yeah, it is underappreciated. That's where I don't own Mystic Quest and I haven't been rushing to it because I kind of feel like I can pick one up when need be. And now hopefully I don't mess myself over there by saying that, but it definitely slides through the cracks that way. I do think the RPGs are finally getting some credit. Chrono Trigger's been on fire. I think just some, we haven't really seen a lot of them go to market either. I think the people that collected Super Nintendo really enjoy it and they've held it dear. I mean, when's the last time we've had a Secret of Mana high grade go on sale at Heritage? I don't know if we have. I can't remember it. I mean, you could tell me, but I think that's part of the problem is that there's a lot less of that stuff. I don't know why, but you look at something like Super Mario World. I mean, first print when I'm talking this stuff, not player's choice. It's just, there's not a whole lot that come to market. I mean, you see a lot more SMB ones than you see Super Mario World. So I don't know if it's a supply issue. If there's not enough supply sometimes, it kind of hinders the collecting ability because no one wants to collect something they can't find. And that's the same reason why stuff can be rare doesn't make it kind of is a negative at one point. And I'd love to pick up more Super Nintendo. I don't find it. I mean, I collect sealed a lot and I have a few CIBs, but you don't find Turtles in Time. You don't find, we didn't even mention Super Metroid, but you just don't find that stuff. I mean, you find, I find NES sealed stuff, not saying Metroid, but I find some of the rare stuff for NES before I find Super Nintendo in the wild. Why? I don't know.
So maybe it's a combination of both, being it's hard to find, and it does show up, it's really expensive. It's like, yeah, I get that.
Yeah, no, I think it's part of that supply issue. It's like, how do you get into something that you can't find? And we talk about this in the art market a bit, is like, if there's nothing for people to collect, well, they're not going to go buy expensive pieces or buy any pieces because they can't find it. So how do you become a collector? And same thing with Super Nintendo to a degree. It's like, if you can't find a title that could get you into it, I kind of feel like NES had the Super Mario Brothers 3, where for a long time that was a very accessible title, and it was an amazing game. Which if, and like myself, like I paid $300 for it, my first graded game. Now, if you want to buy, now it's a little bit different. You want to buy that, but even still, you could recently, I mean, up till a few months ago, you still could get an SMB3 for $1,200. Can't get a Super Mario World first print for that, So that's kind of the problem I kind of see, is that there's just more to collect in other libraries that are more accessible at a price than the Super Nintendo. I'm sure there's people listening cursing me for this thought, but I mean, to me, like, N64 is cool, but it's just not my thing. I just remember I grew up with it, and just, we threw around the boxes, so it just wasn't as prized as NES or Super Nintendo, where I see a Super Nintendo box, and I'm just like, wow, look at this shiny black, like I said about the one I found. No, it really was. I swear to God that I remember finding it. I was just like amazed. I mean, nowadays, like just finding a box, but I was just like, wow, if I could match this up with a cart, I still have it. And
I think of that, and then I think of Game Boy. It's like, you think of how many Game Boy collectors are out there and how many people are now taking on the challenge. And I'll tell you, when I first started collecting Game Boy, there was very few people, just because of that reason. What you said exactly is the supply issue, that would take on that challenge. Like, I'm not going to start buying a few Game Boy boxes just to be really frustrated having to wait years to find them. But now if I type Game Boy into my Instagram, I'll get 30 different people with Game Boy in their user ID that all, specifically specialize in Game Boy and rare sealed games. I see more Game Boy now than ever.
Yeah, I don't know why that is. I mean, obviously something I've understood is that a lot of the UK, Germany, whatever, collected Game Boy. Like, that was their system over there, that really they collected for years. And, the US came in later, much later, to collecting those. And I do wonder if because there was value there, it attracted more collectors, to put that in parentheses, collected, more people to trying to find them because they knew there's value there. But I don't know. I mean, don't get me wrong, I collect Game Boy when I find them. I mean, it's just one of those things that if I find a title for $100 or less, it's sealed and it's a cool title, I just shoot blind. I'm just like, oh, this is cool. Oh, and I actually started doing that with Game Gear. Find a cool title for like $30 that's not Majesco. Okay, has a cool cover. I never liked Game Gear growing up. I think it's cool that they're hard to find and they look cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's an atrocity to find the boxes now. But they do show up. I think there's a lot of fear being put out there right now that these boxes are drying up. These boxes are going to be hard to find. They're going to be impossible. Try not to get too discouraged by that fear, and don't let that cause you to spend too much, beyond your means, if you would. I've kind of thought that the whole time, the entire time I've been collecting. Obviously that's why I was collecting. I bought something because, like, hey, I don't know when I'm going to see this one again, but you're going to see it again. You're going to see it again and again and again, and again. So don't be upset if you miss out a game you really want. I do know the feeling of being discouraged, losing an auction or something happened with the seller, but you'll get over that pretty quick in this hobby because it's going to happen a lot. You're not going to get every game you ever wanted, and something's going to show up, and you're going to think, you're going to picture it in your collection, and you basically already own it in your head, and then you're going to get outbid on it, and that's going to be that. So just get used to that feeling, but also just know that that's not the last chance you're going to get. You don't know when it's going to show up. Probably when you least expect it, you'll have another chance at that certain game. I just think that there's been an influx of people, obviously, into the hobby all at once. And I just think that probably has a lot to do with the prices. Shoving 5 pounds of shit into a 2-pound bag, it's going to overflow, the system a little. But I think throughout the next decade or two, I think a lot of things are going to come out. I'm already seeing a lot of these games that have been selling for a lot. I'm seeing them starting to pile up on eBay. Street Fighter 2 is a perfect example for Super Nintendo. People made a big deal because one sold for, I don't know what it was. And it was uncirculated, which is special, but it sparked something, and now there's everybody thinks their Street Fighter is worth, over 10 grand or whatever. But I noticed these things starting to pile up. And Heritage even has like 3 of them right now for auction all at one time, which tells me that they probably got about 25 more that are coming, in their line. So just be patient. I would think that would be one thing. And I have to tell myself that all the time too, is to just be patient, because I couldn't tell you, which games I missed out on that I really wish I got. But I can tell you the ones I have that I really like, that I did get. So that's kind of going to be your story when you're moving forward. It's not going to be the ones you almost got.
I think you bring up the great point. I was trying to tell a friend of mine that he's new to this whole thing, came from another thing, and patience, because these things will pop up again, especially the Mario titles and stuff like that. I know when people have been in this for a few months and they see stuff jump overnight and they only see like 2 on the market, they just don't realize that a lot of it's just the timing of it. You have, like you said, 5 pounds of shit to fit in a 2-pound bag, and that's a lot of shit. I don't know who's pooping. Is it a dog or what? But I mean, it's a donkey, a cow, elephant. But it's true though. I mean, this stuff, while it's rare, people are like, oh my God, it's just going to be impossible to find anything. That's not, to me, I can't say for certain, it's not true. I mean, I know I look for stuff a lot and I'm able to find it. And that's the thing, I'm sure, with you. You look a lot, it's out there, and it's the stories that come out of are obscure, but it's, to me, we're in the beginning phases of stuff being discovered, not the end. People don't know these are worth money, and once they do, shit will come out. And more than 5 pounds, and not of people, but of actual games. And there will be cases found. I'm not saying that it's going to dilute the market. I'm just saying, if you're trying to get something like, I don't know, one of the Mario games that you're kind of afraid of, I guarantee there's going to be a case or two that pop out eventually. And I mean, look at Ocarina of Time. I know this was it was a collector who bought it a while back, and then Wade bought it, but there's a bunch of Ocarina of Times that came to market, and yes, they're going to go for a lot of money, but the games are out there. Don't let fear of missing out drive you to spend crazy money. I'm not saying that the market's not going to go past that price. I'm just saying, take your time. It's okay not to buy everything in sight, to take your time, and there's always going to be more games to buy. And to your point, of course, and I liked what you said better, but
like I said, being a reseller, every game I have on Super Nintendo probably had it a second copy and resold already. So it's like every game I thought I wouldn't find again, guess what? I found a better copy, or I found a sealed copy later on down the road. So it's like, it happens when you least expect it. That's when you start seeing something. And there's a lot of collectors out there. A lot of this stuff is sitting on people's shelves already. And a guy who has a game probably has a few more, and he probably has a small collection. So, I mean, periodically, for personal reasons, people sell these collections. So, these collections are going to keep coming out. The games are going to keep coming out. They're not that old. They're old, and some of them are limited numbers. I understand that. But to say that they're drying up, I think is a little too soon to say that. Obviously, over the last decade or so, there is less, but I don't know if I feel comfortable saying that there's even less. There's just more collectors now grabbing everything up, so you don't see it as much. But I also collect older toys and board games from the 60s and 70s, and even those things are still coming up in unused condition and new condition, coming out of attics, coming out of collections. And this stuff is from, you're talking 50, 60 years old now, some of these games. So, if you think your 20-year-old Nintendo games, are really old and really hard to find, some of these old toys, some of the older comics, when you start going way back, they can get really hard to find. So I just don't know why people are compelled to spend so much money on a game like Street Fighter when you can see how many are available. You can check the history on a website like Game Value Now and see how much, not even how much, but how often this game has sold in the past. Like, how often does it show up? Does it show up 5 times a year? Does it show up 3 times a year? What is that number? And that should give you a better idea of, how much you should be spending on it. I get people want to own the games they had, but I think right now we're in kind of a crazy time with everything that's going on, and all the new collectors that have gotten introduced to video games and caught the bug just really set it off. I think some of it will calm down, but I do think a lot of it is here to stay.
It's great advice, though. I mean, that's coming from a collector and a reseller, to be like, hey, you don't have to jump on every piece right away. And I think you do a great thing of you collect many things so you don't feel like, oh, I'm missing out by missing this one piece. There's always something else. And me, when I used to go to the swap meet, I went 11 years ago up till a few years ago. It was fun. To me, it was like getting out Sunday mornings. I get to go fresh air, just go walk around. But you couldn't look for one thing. Like if you look for one thing, the chance of finding it's going to be slim. But you start looking for multiple things. So for me, at the time, I was really looking for video games and comics and records. And the reason I started getting the records, one, because I liked them, but two, because they were easier to find. So it gave me gave me more to look for. So if I missed out on one thing, it was okay because there's something else there. So I'd always find more stuff. And that's how you could kind of implement that with collecting video games. It's like, if you're only looking for like 3 games, yes, that's going to be hard. But if you're looking across many different platforms, and that's what I've done is started to collect Game Gear, Game Boy. I collect most platforms up till GameCube. I mean, I collect Genesis. I'll pick up a Master System. Just stuff I find cool. And I'm not saying buy everything in sight. I'm just saying give yourself some freedom to not drive yourself crazy over like 2 titles.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what happened is everybody who's new to this hobby was immediately attracted to Mario 3, Mario 2, Super Mario World, kind of the same games that everyone else has been looking for. But now that some of those people have gotten the games, that they wanted, whether they paid an arm and a leg for it or not, I don't know. Now everyone's kind of starting to branch out a little more. So I'm hoping that, between that and maybe people spending less money on video games altogether, maybe spending more money on vacations when they can now, I think that maybe will help distribute some of these prices, because it seems a lot of the prices are concentrated on certain games. And like any game with Mario is like, it's hot right now. It's going to be worth a lot. But that might make other people think that this other game they have is worth a lot more, kind of like a trickle effect, when it might not be true. I really don't think anyone's looking for that game for the price you have it, sir. It's like, just because Mario has been killing it at the auction doesn't mean this game is. So there's a lot of discrepancy between the asking prices right now and the sold prices. Like if you look on eBay, the asking prices, some of them are astronomical. But if you click sold listings, it's cricket. Not many games are selling for more than $5 or $6 grand, and those are like your head honcho titles there. Super Metroid, Super Mario RPG.
I think you bring up a good point of how one sale doesn't make every game worth more. It's one sale out of how many of those games, and how that happens a lot. One sells on Heritage for $12,000. Now everyone's like, now I want 15 or even 12. And it's kind of like, that's where I kind of think, and yes, the market's been jumping. I'm not trying to say where the market's going to go, but like you said, it is cricket sometimes when you go to what's sold and what's on the, even what's on the market. You think if it was worth what people go, that one sale, the eBay would be wiped. Street Fighter 2 would be wiped. Everything would be sold, but it's not like that for the expensive games. And the games that are really expensive, when there's a lot of supply, if there's not enough demand, there's going to be some interesting stuff. But again, I don't want to be here. I'm not saying anything's going to crash. I'm just saying that there, like anything, any market, there's going to be eventually some softening. Maybe this is a bottom, who knows, but just patience, like you said, is the important thing.
You're a comic collector, right? I don't collect comics at all, but you must have some history.
I used to. I keep on I really have 2 boxes of good stuff, and I keep on, even literally while we're talking here, I had someone mess me back that they want a few more, and it was just like the stuff that I don't need I don't need to have, but also I don't need to sell. So like, is it better than having cash? I don't know, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Inflation play.
Coming from the comic realm, which I feel like a lot of this new money stuff coming over from the comic, collectible side, with WADA and everything and their connection to comics, with some of their founders and everything. I feel like the comic collectors kind of brought over some of their own rules, like what's valuable in comics must be valuable in video games kind of thing. Because the black box thing, like, yeah, people used to collect black boxes, but as far as having the first prints and the early and the best seals, and even the Mario Left Bros, I have never heard of a Mario Left Bros until this year, basically. So I think, I'm wondering is it the comic collectors that are kind of bringing their own, what they know as their values from collecting comics, first appearance of this, early release. Is that the most valuable stuff in comics? And they're kind of translating that, saying, well, it must be the most valuable in video games?
I don't think it's the comic people, because I'm not saying that because I was one or I am one. I'm thinking it's more a speculation play. You hear a lot of, I'm not blaming the baseball card people, I swear. But when it's, the thing about black boxes is they're easy to understand that they were early Nintendo. So with that being said, people have confidence. And I always say knowledge leads to confidence. Well, the knowledge is there for black box or early prints. And people translate that to, oh, well, that has to be worth a lot more money. And if you're an investor that invests in high-end stuff, you need the best. And you will pay, really the thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is, to the top 1% of the people buying this stuff, 150 grand probably is not a whole lot of money. I mean, that's the thing that kind of happens. I mean, it's a lot of money to me, but to them, it's not. So with that being said, when they might have sold $1 million worth of sports cards, they come over and, $15,000 for a game? That, okay. It's the first edition. There's only probably 5 other games in this thing. Well, that's cool. That sounds like a good investment. There's a lot of investing being done. Well, people call it investing. I call it speculation. Now, what's the difference?
I mean, that's got to be what it is.
Well, what's the difference? And I've had an argument with someone about this. Not argument, we'll call it debate. But people think sometimes, I've actually said this in a podcast before, is that people sometimes think they're investing when they're speculating. And sometimes the only difference is having the absolute knowledge the experience and the proven track record to call it investing. Now, if you're not knowing what you're doing and you're just putting money towards it, it's gambling. It's speculation. Sorry. Those are kind of interchangeable, and that's kind of what happens in a market like this. Now, again, I'm not saying the market's going to go down. I'm just saying that every game, I can't say 9 out of 10 games being sold for $5,000 are most likely for speculative reasons. You don't have people hey, this is my favorite game ever. I don't care what it's worth. I'm buying it because I really want it. It's going in my personal collection. It's never coming out. There is some, I'd say 1 out of 10 or so. And props to those people, and nothing against, a lot of people, some of my best friends are purely in it for financial reasons. But with that said, when there's too many speculators around, it could spell for some trouble. And that's kind of what's happened with Beanie Babies and everything else, is when you have too many people that only want to flip to make a buck, well, once you stop having that second person in bidding, there starts to be trouble. And if there's only one person bidding, doesn't have to go for a whole lot of money. Now, I'm not saying stuff goes from 100,000 to 10,000. No, there's never going to be a hang tab Mario going for $5,000 again. That just ain't happening. But
right, I agree.
But you don't have to chase and fear that it's never going to slow down, because no matter what, it will slow down. That's just the laws of physics. Everything eventually comes down eventually. So
some of these, I mean, this isn't the first time video games have been really popular. I mean, there was a time in 2016, 2015 where the prices were really getting out of control, but sealed games were always the hardest to sell. Loose games were pretty easy to move. In fact, they were getting really hot for a minute. It was just collecting loose. And then a complete in box, would sell just fine. But sealed games, for the longest time, those were what I couldn't move. I always had to lower the prices. I always had to field offers on sealed games, which is weird because it's exactly the opposite now. Sealed games are the easiest to move, but back then it was tough to move sealed games for the most part. The Mario games have always been, those key titles have always been popular sealed. They've always kind of cost a pretty penny compared to the rest of the market. So there's nothing really new there.
Was it because the sealed ones were costing more than the other ones? Was there discrepancy with price? Or was it just people just wanted to buy them to...
I honestly don't know. Honestly, the sealed prices weren't that much more than complete in box at the time because they just wouldn't sell. Maybe a $50 game would be an $80 sealed game. But then there's certain games like Ninja Gaiden Trilogy, which they were so common sealed compared to complete, that the price would end up being almost the same. The person who buy the complete would buy the sealed one just for the same price, because oftentimes you had to buy it sealed if you wanted a copy, especially in good condition. But but that's something that's really new, is the sealed collecting as an investment. I'm not sure how I feel about it, because when I think of comics or baseball cards, there's only one way to collect them. You have to either buy that comic or you have to buy that baseball card. You don't really have a choice. But when it comes to video games, you can buy a complete in-box copy if you don't feel like spending a crazy amount on sealed, and that you'll probably be just as happy with that when it's sitting on your shelf. You forget all about it. And if you don't want to go that route, you can afford collecting loose games. So there's so many avenues to go with video games that's different than I think comics and baseball cards in that way. But I think when it comes to financials, people are going to make that sacrifice and say, all right, I'm not collecting sealed then if it's going to be like this, or I'm not going to collect the boxes if it's going to, if I can't afford it.
Well, that's the thing. It's a great point you bring up, and it's something that a lot of people forget is like, hey, there's X amount of sealed this game. I just wrote an article that said, hey, there's only less than 500 sealed Super Mario Brothers 1. Another point is, well, there is 1 million plus of that game out there if you just want to it's owning the same piece. It's just not in the same condition. But with that being said, I believe in games long term, and we'll see what happens. I even believe in sealed games long term, but I think the current market's a little crazy. I personally, and no one take my advice, I personally will not spend $20,000 for, where the market is right now. It's just not me,
I've gotten this far, and I'm missing a few games sealed that are selling for these prices. Like I don't have Final Fantasy 2 sealed. I don't have I don't have Mario RPG sealed yet. But I was able to get 600 other sealed games. Some really good titles. I got Hagane. I got Ninja Warriors. I got some really good games sealed, and I have yet to spend above $10,000 on a video game. I've not done that yet. So it's really hard for me to spend even more than that, 20,000 people, 30,000. It's just badly as I want it. And as long as I've been collecting and as many sealed games as I have, I think if that was the last game I needed sealed, I don't know, I'm not even sure I would buy that for that price. So I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure what some of these people are thinking, spending these kind of money, thinking.
There's nothing wrong, let's be clear, there's nothing wrong if that's the one game someone truly wants. If someone truly wants that game for their collection, I'm never going to hate on anyone for spending even $200,000 on a game. But just be honest with yourself are you afraid that the price is just going up so you want to buy it now? Are you buying it because hey, this is going to go up, and what if it goes down? I think, just got to be honest with yourself. And as long as you're buying it and you really think it's going to make you happy, people can spend whatever they want. I'm not going to really, I know I won't go spend crazy money on games. I'm not saying I never would. But if I did, it'd have to be almost an investment at that point, because I'm not going to go spend 20 grand on a game that, like most people, it would have to be, okay, because this game's probably underpriced. It would just have to be drastically over, it's just, I don't have that. I'm like, I have to have this game for myself. And I want to see someone do that and open it. I want to see someone spend $20,000 and be like, just because I can. It's going to piss off people. I want someone to make that video of opening up a Super Mario World just because they can. But no, I just kind of
been done, but hopefully not too many people anymore. It's better to just get it into the hands of a collector and,
Yeah, no, and, collecting's great, and that's what brings us here today, and I think it's great that people have this hobby here where they can buy games for thousands of dollars and they have their game rooms and they're happy. My biggest fear is the same thing I have with people purchasing art, is that they overpay and they have to go to sell and when they need the money, and then they're in shit's creek because the market's, they never thought it would go down. That's my fear, is like, I never saw this happening. You have to plan for both ways. You always have to plan that you could be wrong and what that looks like on the other side. So if someone spends $50,000 on an artwork or a sealed game, and that's their life savings, and when they go to sell it, they only can get 20. That happens. It just, in many different markets, from baseball to comics, whatever. I'm not saying it can't go to 100,000, but it it definitely could go down. So just don't. It's gambling at that point. And what I say about gambling is gamble with the money you could afford to lose.
Yeah, and it's a little bit, I mean, it's kind of a little bit of a situation right now, too, where the games went up so fast and so high to prices that I don't think any of us really imagined. And at least some of us who were collecting for a long time. I think maybe we thought we'd see these prices someday, maybe not this quickly, but there's obviously a lot of FOMO for the buyers right now. A lot of new buyers are afraid that they might not get another chance at this game. I feel like there's also a lot of sellers that are having the same feelings of selling a game too cheap. They don't want to sell the game now because it might be worth X, Y, and Z in the future, even though right now it's worth more than you could have ever dreamed. And a couple of years ago, you would have been ecstatic to sell it at this price. But now it's almost like there's a little bit of greed kind of there. It's like, well, I don't want to sell it now because if it's worth this much now, it might be worth, that much later. It's a slippery slope. It really is. See where it ends.
No, I think what you just said is what I completely believe is happening right now, is that people are fear of missing out, so prices are going up, which is causing people that don't want to sell because they think, hey, if I sell now, it could be worth double, which happened a few months ago. Is like people sold in August, September because like, oh, this is the peak, and then they sold and it's kept going up. So now when people have games, they're like, well, I don't want to sell. I mean, we all get that. I mean, myself is like, I have games that I probably should move just so I could clear some. I'm obviously spent a lot of money on games, and it would probably be good to cash in, or at least like not cash in, but like, hey, haven't put too much money into this crazy hobby. But at the same time, like it's only natural, like to be afraid of selling too low. But what happens is there's less on the market. More people are paying crazier prices. There has to be something has to give at one point. Now, is it the end of recession? Is that the catalyst? I don't know. That's something I've talked about a few times where I do think the next auction's going to pop. I do think the first half of the year is going to be some wild numbers. I think the second half might be some cooling off, but look at it both ways and try to, be happy if it goes up, be happy if it goes down, rather than put all your marbles in one side. And I agree with you 1,000% there. And I don't know what happens in the future. No one can. And I know I'm doing the disclaimers a lot because I don't want anyone to take my advice ever, because
yeah, we're just speculating. We have been the whole time.
Well, it's just a fun video game talking, but it is completely true. And you see that a lot. And there is people coming into the space and spending a lot of money. And I definitely think there's going to be more people continuing to get into video games long term. Short to medium term, I don't know. I just, like you said, I could see people going back to concerts, going back to sports, going back to bars, going back to vacations. There's a lot of stuff that people spend their discretionary money on usually, but right now are spending on collectibles because they've been stuck at home. I work in live entertainment. I can say right now that industry has been starting to be active again. It has. I mean, I could tell you for a fact that there's more activity right now of people spending money in that arena, not in actual arena, but on concerts and live events than they were even a month ago. So it'll be interesting how that plays out. Will demand step up? Will more people come into video games as we expect long term in the short term to cover that? Or will there be a little bit of a market disruption? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying I think everything is going to come crashing down and go back to what it was worth a couple of years back.
Even a year ago, I don't think it's going back. Yeah.
Even a year ago. I just think some games, and not every game is worth, this much money. So I think certain games are going to come down to earth, and certain games that really deserve to be in the outer space as far as price, rightfully so,
Yeah, no, it's fun. I mean, this is fun talk because no one knows. So, I mean, it's fun to try to think of what could happen. And it's nice it's funny because usually I have this conversation with people. I feel like I'm the not asshole, but I'm, I'm the Debbie Downer. I'm the person like, I think we both realize anything could happen, which is what I hope other people realize when they have the opposite opinion, where they think it's going up, up, and up, but they have to have an open mind of if they're wrong, their contingency plan.
I mean, I think it's gonna continue for a while. I think, I think a lot of this the new people in this hobby are going to stick around because they've realized how awesome video games are and how fun they are to collect. And it really is like the most collectible thing, you know, when you think about it. It's got to be one of the most collectible things. So it's like I can see a lot of this new blood sticking around, keeping the prices high for a while. But I do think it's going to start to die out maybe in a decade or so from now. I think we'll start to see, and because you can ask people from other hobbies, you know, a lot older. Like I was talking to some people who collect board games, and they said back in the 90s, you couldn't get this stuff, you know, without paying an arm and a leg. And it's like they're selling it to me now. You know, board games have kind of died. They're not really collectible anymore. And they're saying, man, you know, if you had known what I paid for this in the 90s, you know, selling it to me for a fraction now because the demand is gone. You know, and I feel like, you know, I have a younger brother, and he's 18 years old, and you know, he plays his Minecraft and he plays his new modern games, and he just doesn't have an appreciation for it. He doesn't have an appreciation for anything. I feel like a lot of the youth these days, they don't appreciate nothing. So I don't know.
They don't give a shit about nothing.
Well, we're going to need them in this hobby to keep it where it is, you know, especially if you think you're buying these games right now as an investment. You're going to need that generation below you to have interest. And while there is some younger interest, I don't know if it's going to be enough to keep these prices where they're at.
Well, I will say that age group of where this hobby is actually, it's going to go up. The amount of people that are our age are going to be entering it, because we're still at a young, the people that are collecting video games, they're a very young group for collecting. Like, people don't collect really in their, you know, teens, or they don't have the money to really put into it. But like you said, in 10 years, it'll be interesting. But I do think you do bring up a great point of how you really do need young people to continuing to be interested. And will they go back to the systems? I think they will, but who knows? I mean, as the great Creed Bratton from The Office said, he don't give an F about nothing. I mean, that's what, sorry, that you had me that pop in my head from when you said that. He don't give a F about nothing. But no, it's a good point, though. No, it's true. I mean,
they don't.
And that's like trying to pretend like, you know, my kids will have any nostalgia to what I collect. Probably not.
Exactly. That's that's the only thing that worries me with some of the stuff. But, you know, I'm 30, you know, I'm 33. I imagine that when I'm 45, 50, I'm going to be looking to unload this stuff. And I'm just wondering how many of my peers around the same time are going to be looking to unload the stuff too, and who's going to be buying it, you know? People like my younger brother, you know, who are 18, 19 years old right now, are they going to be buying this stuff? I don't know, you know? That's the big if.
That happen in comic books. It just matters. There's so much we can't plan for, is the popularity of, say, Mario, Zelda, you know, if they ever make a great Zelda movie, if they keep on making great games. That happened with comic books, where there was a catalyst with the movies that really, I mean, the prices have 10x or whatever since then. I mean, well, 3 or 4x probably. But from the comic book realm, I collected comic books for a long time. 12 years ago, I got serious about it. And, you know, the movies were a big part of me being like, oh, people are going to really be into this. It got me more into it. And I picked up some of the top comics, well, not top, but, you know, some of the first appearances of Spider-Man and all those X-Men for what people would consider, oh my God, you paid $900 for X-Men 1, you know, and that was the price. And it wasn't there. I mean, there was demand back then. It just more people got interested. And the funny thing is, when you look at the supply side of comics, there's way more X-Men 1s than probably the top 10 video games sealed combined. But like you said, you can't just look at sealed. If you want to own the first Mario, you can buy just the cart. You know, like, but that's also at the other point there, but there is millions. The thing is that I also, to the counterpoint of myself, there is probably a million collectors of video games in a sense that like own a cart of their favorite games or systems. Sure. And that's the other part is like
more and more every day now.
But that's exactly it, is like how many people still own a Super Nintendo today and play it every few years or come back to it. And I think that number is really high compared to collectible market. I mean, how many collectors are really in this space? 200? Like, it really is not a whole lot. 500?
Yeah.
Especially when you start to get into like, you know, who's spending 5 figures on these games. Now the number's a lot smaller, and some of these people who are spending this much on the games, I've noticed they have 2 or 3 copies of the same game and they've only been collecting for a year and a half. Like, I'm telling you right now, in 10 years from now, if you keep it up, you're going to have about 30 of these, and nobody's going to want to buy them for the prices you're paying now, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's like...
Yeah, no, I hear you, man. So let's wrap this up with, because, you know, we might have gone a little off topic of Super Nintendo.
Yeah, so, I mean, I was just saying, I'm not I don't know too much about the gameplay and, you know, which games are going to be the best. I haven't played all 700 of them, but, you know, when it comes to collecting the boxes, you know, and the variations and the differences, and the rarity and the values, I know all that stuff. I'm really keen on that stuff. I love the collecting aspect of it.
John, it's been honestly a pleasure and an honor, and it's been fun to kind of go over all this, and always refreshing to hear new perspectives. Thank you to everyone for listening, and as always, enjoy the hunt.